to the 25th Berlin ProductTank, the first time we're online. So we're going to see how the experiment goes today. And we're actually part of World Product Day. So you may know that around the world today, there are many product tanks running remote meetups. So thanks for choosing ours and coming to hear our speakers. So the topic that we had tonight is to think again. So in recent months, obviously, a lot has changed for pretty much all of us in every product, in every part of life that we're living. And what we'd like to do is to explore the topic of revisiting assumptions from different angles. For that, we have three very exciting speakers for you. The first is Randy Silver. What he's going to do is he's going to help us revisit this present moment. So with coronavirus as it is, how do we need to revisit our assumptions? How can we relook at our strategy and start over, take a fresh look at things? From there, we're going to move to Shruti Ramaya from N26. She will talk us through user research methods and how we can keep our user research more fresh and find new, more novel ways of doing it to uncover new information. And then finally, we're going to take a final perspective from Eli Montgomery, who will be challenging, in fact, user-centric design in general. Is it the right way of doing things? If not, how could we approach things? As a quick comment, so at the end of the stream, we're going to have a Q&A with all three speakers. This Q&A will obviously come from questions from the audience. So on this side of your screen, the right-hand side of your screen, hopefully you can see a chat in YouTube. Please feel free to ask questions throughout, and then at the end, we will put some of these questions to the speakers. So without further ado, I will pass to our first speaker for this evening. So Randy Silver, are you good to go? Just a thumbs up. Cool.
Hello, I'm Randy Silver. You might already know my voice if you listen to the Product Experience podcast, but this is what I look like. So, hey, it's really great to be here with you. I'm really excited to be part of World Product Day, especially because we're also celebrating ProductTank's 10th anniversary. And that just feels really special. It's nice to be able to spend it with you. And a dirty little secret, this is the first time in weeks I've had the excuse to wear something that needs to be ironed. And I like wearing nice shirts and going out to events and conferences and things like that. So thank you for giving me the excuse. I want to talk about what the hell do we do now? But I'm also doing this talk for ProductTank in Ireland, and I wanted to localize it for them so you get the animation for them as well. Ooh, I just lost my screen share. Let's do that again. That's what happens when we do this live, right? There we go. Okay, everything's working now. So there we go with the animation. So what the hell or what the feck do we do here? If you grew up on Father Ted, you'll get that reference. I'm here tonight because I'm going to talk about a book that I just wrote and released. It's called What Do We Do Now? A Product Manager's Guide to Strategy in the Time of COVID-19. I'll start off telling you about why I wrote it. I'll give you some of the advice in it, actually most of the advice in it, as well as what I've learned since I finished it. So tiny bit about me and some background. I get bored really easily. I do a lot of things, most of which are focused on talking to people and trying to learn as much as possible. I co-host the podcast, The Product Experience with Lily Smith. She's the pretty one, you get me, sorry. But we talk to some amazing product people every week. I'm a consultant working with companies on things like leadership and discovery and communication and collaboration and prioritization and alignment. If you get those things right, you've pretty much nailed it. Everything else takes care of itself. And I also host a regular virtual lean coffee called Product in the Ether, where a bunch of beautiful nerds chat about whatever's on their mind. And you're really welcome to join us on that. It's at pitted.social, and I'd love to see you join us. But all that means that I talk to a lot of people pretty often. And a couple of months back, there was a fairly regular frame. Everyone was saying the same thing. It was a variation on COVID is coming. COVID is coming. It was very Game of Thrones. And I found myself having the same conversation over and again and again and again, because everyone was feeling like this. Everyone felt like the great philosopher Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and we all got punched in the mouth. So I was having these conversations, and they were all pretty similar. And the advice I was giving seemed to resonate, and it was the same advice again and again. So I sat down to write an article to see what I could do to, instead of having one-on-one conversations, to open it up a bit further. And the article just kept growing. It got longer and longer and longer. And I said, this might actually be a book. So I sent a short pitch to Jeff Gotthelf and Josh Seiden, and I sent it to them for two reasons. One is they run Sense and Respond Press, which is a great publisher that does these short books on business and product topics. The other is they're really smart dudes, and I knew that if they agreed with the type of stuff that I was saying, then there's a pretty good chance that it was good advice. And the last one is I thought they'd be people who would go along with my plan, which is it's the wrong time to publish a book and try and take advantage of this. It's the right time to publish a book and make all the profits go to charity. And they agreed to try to turn it around really quickly. We took us about 4 or 5 weeks from beginning to end to get it done. And they agreed all the money from this is going to Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders. It's about $5 in the States. I think it's €4.10 on Amazon Germany. So I'm going to encourage you to buy it. And the dirty secret is it's not just for product managers. It's for anyone who's having discussions about prioritization and strategy. So buy it for yourself, buy it for your manager, buy it for your team. End of pitch. Because that's enough about the book and why I wrote it. You want to hear about what is it that we should be doing now. So I've broken this talk up into a series of parts. Part one is about getting started, going back to basics. We need to go back to basics now because we need to talk about what it is that we actually do. This is stuff that we're actually really good at. We should be applying our discovery process to our strategy. We should work with our stakeholders, our executives and our customers and our partners, and work with ourselves. Review our roadmaps and priorities and how we work. We do this because right now the foundations that our strategy is built on are broken, or at least in danger of being broken. And there's a few things we need to make sure that we understand. We need to make sure that we understand the customer and the problem that they have. We need to make sure that we understand the market. And we need to make sure that we understand how we propose to help the customer solve that problem better than anyone else can. We do this all the time. This is the double diamond stuff, right? This is a cliche, but are we solving the right problem? And are we solving the problem right? And I love that cliche so much. I love that double diamond so much that I used it as part of my Out of Owls logo. And we have a lot of tools that we use at this stage. It comes down to a few basics, though, and these things often get overlooked, especially when we're at later stages of product development. People often treat discovery and this early stuff, this looking at your plan, as early phase stuff, and they don't revisit it. But this is more important than ever. So let's take these things in turn. Let's get into this. Let's start with about customers. Now, we know our customers, right? We know customers and they've got problems. So we need to think about who are we trying to help and what are their goals and obstacles. This is, again, basic stuff. This is personas. You do have personas, correct? But we need to layer on some more questions than we normally would when we go back and look at these personas. So you may have had these from a few months ago, but go back and look, what is your customer's current situation? How might that be different from where they were previously? What relevant habits of theirs may have been affected or changed by the crisis? The hardest thing in the world to change is somebody's habit. But there's this massive external stimulus that have changed things for all of us. I mean, I should be with you in the same room drinking a beer. Well, I should be talking now and then drinking a beer with you afterwards. But you know what I mean. And we'll do the best that we can about that. You need to be thinking about your customers from the perspective of if you do change something for them right now, are they in a position to use it? I was in a conversation last week with a product leader who was talking about their approach, and they use a pretty advanced form of jobs to be done, which is a really, really good thing to do in this case. Because what they did is they already had all the things that are going on right now as part of their customer personas, as the jobs to be done. What they did have to do, though, was reprioritize and go and say, these are the jobs that are important right now, and these are the ones that aren't. So let's look at some examples of what companies have done. Auto insurers, some that I've heard of, are giving money back to customers because people aren't on the road right now. They're not having accidents. So no claims are being put in. The company is actually able to get the same profitability without having to charge quite as much. Early on in the crisis, here in the UK anyway, there were a bunch of breweries that pivoted to making hand sanitizer and other companies that pivoted to making protective equipment. The local shops near me, the greengrocer, the butcher, have started to do deliveries and weekly baskets. They now have a recurring revenue. They have a subscription business that they never had before. And strangely enough, the big online groceries couldn't capitalize in the same way because they were ready to get bigger. Their systems held up. What didn't hold up was their logistics. They only had so many delivery slots. Again, in the UK, Unmind and other wellness apps have gone free for the NHS and for other frontline workers. Intercom has added a free tier for nonprofits. In the collaboration space, Notion and others have opened up a lot more and changed their functionality. And a couple of months ago, Zoom was everywhere and blowing up, and Google and Facebook have been struggling to catch up and have just launched new things in this space. People are reprioritizing around their customers and thinking about them in a big way. The next thing we need to look at is not just customers, but the market that we're all operating within. Almost no one could have predicted this situation, and very, very few planned for it. And if you think you know where your industry, where your team, where your job's going to be in a year's time, then I want your crystal ball. You know, it was easy a couple months back to predict that disaster was going to happen. And we've had more than enough of it. We've had a massive loss of life. We've had entire industries in deep trouble, and lots of us have lost our jobs. But for those of us who still have jobs, there's also massive opportunities. When we start working on a new product, we take a look at the gaps in the market. Where are the opportunities? What's the opportunity space for us? It could be on price, it could be on quality, it could be on availability, on features or usability. We look at the players and map out what we can offer that will make a difference. Where do we have the right to win? But any work you did in this space more than a few weeks ago needs to be revalidated. Who's going to go out of business? Who's getting acquired? Who's getting bailed out? Who's going to launch that killer new feature and totally change the way your entire market works? We all want to build a defensible moat around our own advantages, but take a look at your competition. Whose moat is now crossable? What assumptions about the market is your positioning, your roadmap, your release plan all built on? Take a look and make sure that everything you're doing is valid. And there's a few different ways of doing this market analysis. Two that are really important is scenario planning and Wardley mapping. Wardley mapping is something that will totally blow your mind the first dozen times you try it, but it's really, really powerful. I talk about both of these a bit more in the book, but there's a lot of good resources online for these, and I encourage you to check them out. Let's take a moment now to pay respect to the thousands of roadmaps that have been demolished over the past few months. It's pretty sad. It's pretty hard for the roadmaps out there because COVID did this. COVID's been kind of a gangster on roadmaps. And there's a couple of questions we need to ask before we go on. We need to not just go on as before, we need to think about what we're doing. The first one is there something we can do to help with the current situation? You've probably asked this question already, and there's no right answer to this one. Help is a pretty wide open space. Early on, it was around hand sanitizer and PPE. It's looking for a vaccine, a cure, and treatment options, providing beds and things like that. But there's a lot of other things out there. It's about wellness and education. It's around making sure that your company stays viable and you and your employees and everyone else working with you gets a paycheck and stays employed. There's only one wrong way to answer this, which is not to have the conversation at all. So please, if you haven't already, do make sure you have this conversation. Then you need to ask, is what we're currently working on still the best thing to do? If it is, fantastic, go ahead and do it. And maybe change how you're going to do it, but not what. But if it's not the best thing to do, then change. That's incredibly important. But before you make that change, ask yourself a couple more questions. Ask yourself, can you change pace quickly? What's your release cycle like? Are you up to doing daily, weekly, continuous releases? If you're a company that does annual or quarterly or monthly releases, do you have the culture to let you do it? You need a lot from technology and operations and sales and marketing to be able to support doing regular, very quick release cycles. And even if you can do it, what are your customers expecting? Are they able to take it on? Are they able to integrate it? Do they have the access that they need? Are they counting on certain things from you? Are you part of someone else's core infrastructure? So when we talk about strategy, there's a few things that we need to make sure that we're getting right as well. We need to get the terminology right. We talked about the market analysis and we talked about the personas, and we put these things together and it comes up with a series of bets, because that's what we do, hypotheses, which then get prioritized. That's what our roadmaps turn into. But let's go back to the basics on this just for a moment. I'm not going to turn this into a big roadmaps talk. There's plenty of great ones about that. But every bet we make is a hypothesis. And as a fact, it's something we know plus an assumption. If we do this, it will turn into something. And we try and turn that assumption and that hypothesis into facts. We did this, we knew this, we did this, this happened, and we think it's repeatable. But, it's always a but, assumptions are tricky little buggers, because there's an emotional component that gets involved with assumptions sometimes. And an assumption plus an emotion is an opinion. And opinions have this nasty little habit of being impervious to facts. You can take an assumption, add a fact to it that proves or disproves it, and you can change things. But with an opinion, that's when you have to break out all your advanced skills in stakeholder management or team management. It's hard. So when we're doing this, there's a number of different ways that we can map out our facts and assumptions. There's assumptions mapping, very aptly named. That's really good. Impact mapping, fantastic as well. Theory of change as well. And the last one is dragon mapping. This is one of my own that I need to blog about at some point. It's my own version of impact mapping. It says for each output, what are the things that have to happen? For this to happen, what has to be true? And we go and we deal with all of those things. And we take all of those things, what has to be true, and we say, is this a fact or is it an assumption? And if it's an assumption, is it unemotional or emotional for people? And we color code them, and then we know how to deal with them. And we prioritize our experiments by proving as many facts as possible and taking assumptions and opinions off the board wherever we possibly can. And we map out the critical ones. You can do a riskiest assumption test, a riskiest opinion test if you want, all those kinds of things. Okay, next part, let's talk about the capabilities, because we need to talk about predicting the future. Didn't realize we were psychic. That was part of the job description. But that's what your salespeople and your customers and your stakeholders are all expecting, because they're always asking, when can I have it? And the way that we figure out when somebody can have something is based on how we've done things in the past. But this is not normal. This is definitely not the new normal. It's not working from home. And I realize you guys are mostly in Berlin and Germany, which has been opening up. And I'm fascinated to find out what it's like as you go back into the office and what this looks like and what has been learned about working from home and how you're using the office environment now. And we're going to learn a lot from you. But you need to think about all these things. You need to think about who is available and how available are they? Are they dealing with toddlers and taking care of people? Is anybody sick? What tools do they have access to or do not have access to? Do they have access to customers? Conversely, some people actually have a lot more access to customers than they ever did before. And I've heard some really fascinating stories about that. And I think hopefully that'll come up in the next couple of talks. We already talked about the release cycles. Are you ready to go faster? Are your customers up for it? Can also talk about ways of working. This is actually the desk of someone I know. He sent me this picture a couple months ago, and I was really, really jealous. I gotta tell you, my working environment looks nothing like this. But there's a number of things to think about. Do you need that meeting? I know so many people who've got video conference fatigue because everything is a meeting, and they're exhausting. And thank you so much for coming and doing yet another video call with us tonight. You need to plan out the right kind of channels. Can you cancel certain meetings and make them status updates? Can you do them in Slack or Teams or Jira or Notion or even email? Whatever. Can you make something easier and lighten the cognitive load for people? Do you have clear channels for social things and for urgent things? Because if you try and post urgent in a social channel, it'll just get lost. And again, people will get fatigued. Social channels are amazing We need them because we don't have the ability to just turn around and talk to the person next to us or bump into someone at lunch or at coffee the way we did before. We need to have serendipity of cross-pollination, of talking to each other. But you also need that channel that says, I need this now, and have people respond to it and give the right prioritization to it. I've heard some really interesting things about the way some people work. There are teams that are all ordering pizza at the same day and have an allowance for doing it, and then they have a social lunch together. Other teams have game nights or pub quizzes or drinks on a Friday afternoon. And some companies even changed the way they handle benefits and have started allowing people cash advances so that they can set up maybe not an office quite this nice, but upgrade their Wi-Fi, their chair, their desk, get a second monitor, all things that help make people happier and more productive. One thing I think is done, or I'm hoping will finally be done, is the idea of presenteeism. That idea that you have to be at your desk and appearing to be working. I call it productivity theater. This is something that's really hard to do with remote teams because you need to be able to actually trust people to do their job. I know there are some companies and there are some tools out there that actually monitor what you're doing at your desk. I can't believe that this is going to survive for long or work really well in most environments. People who can manage to outcomes over outputs have always had a superpower. And this is something that we should be good at, but something to really take pride in and concentrate on now. Make sure you're paying attention to this. Okay, I've got one more section to talk about. So before we get into that, let's do a quick review of where we've been to so far. Classic pyramid. So you start off by identifying the opportunity space with personas and market analysis, and you need to review all that. You need to figure out how you're going to be solving that problem for customers. And you need to figure out how we're going to work together. And reviewing all of these things right now and what's changed for your customers, for your situation, for yourself, for you and your team. The last part of the book is the plan. Now, you actually need to buy the book to get this part, but I'm going to encourage you to buy it anyway, because again, it's cheap and it goes to charity. But the one thing I'm going to tell you is, obviously, I don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. This is the one thing we've learned. The important thing to do right now is to make sure that we're asking the right questions, that our teams and our management teams are having the right discussions, because that's the job. That's what we do. It's what we should always be doing. This is our superpower. Make sure that you're questioning your assumptions, redoing the roadmaps, updating personas and prioritization, and learning all the time. If we do this, then everything else falls into place and works. There is one more thing. So originally this talk was supposed to be a video, and I pre-recorded it, and there's some lovely animations and fun things, and it's a slightly different version, and it just did not work when StreamYard, when we tried testing it earlier today. So we reconfigured, and the talk is this way now. But there's something I want to show you. I've been asking people to tell me one thing that they've learned over the last few weeks, over the last couple of months, and asking them to post small videos of a Post-it note of one thing that they've learned. And they're fantastic. And I do have that in the video of the talk. It is towards the end. There is a note about what timestamp to jump to if you want to skip the talk again and see the 6 or 7 different interesting shirts I wear in the video. You can skip all that, go to, I think it's still about 19 minutes, and see this. And I will do a supercut of just these one things soon enough. If you want to participate, I'd love it if you did. Just use the hashtag #WhatNowBook, put on Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, and I will get it and I will add it on. Again, thank you all very much. Please do stay in touch. I'd love for you to listen to the podcast. I would love to see you at Product in the Ether. I'd love for you to buy the book and give me a call if you want to talk about anything else. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Randy. Thanks for your time. We had a kind of trial run a few hours ago, and there was this kind of panic at this situation with not being able to present it as originally planned. And I have to say, seeing you kind of turn it around in an hour and just present it like you were fully prepared to do it live as well is pretty impressive. And I think a great overview for anyone responding to this moment. So thanks very much.
Thanks. The dirty secret on that is preparing a video on it means I've done this talk about 70 times in the past 3 days.
That would help. Yeah. Awesome. So Randy will be returning later for the Q&A. If you have any questions for him, please submit them in the YouTube comment stream. Hopefully, Shruti, our next speaker, is ready to go. I can see she's preparing in the background. So Shruti will be telling us about user research. So she's a lead user researcher at N26. And she will be telling us how to ensure that our research works in a more continuous, novel manner where we're actually uncovering new things rather than just the same things over and over. So I will pass on to Shruti. Okay.
Great.
Enjoy.
Are we on? The slides are working and I'm visible. That's good.
It seems we can see the slide. We can see you. You're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Good evening. We're all getting used to this really unusual format. You should know all I see right now is my own slides. So I'm going to try and look at the camera and look like I'm speaking to you. My name is Shruti Ramaya. I lead user research at N26. I started there in August 2018 and came on board essentially to build this discipline of user research, built out the team and also built the processes working with our product management and our product design teams. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. Before that, I've been working in consulting, the biggest chunk of which was with IDEO in Munich. So that's the kind of experience I bring to this conversation, being a designer and a researcher. And diving straight in, we're going to talk about a couple of things today. And the first one is the crazy F word, failure. So I know that can probably trigger a few people, but this is something that's important to talk about in the research context, and we'll be looking at that today. And the second is what I've called creative problem exploration. So not problem solving, but problem exploration. And let's dive into that in the next few slides. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but hopefully if you have specific questions, we can talk about those in the Q&A. So the process I'm going to describe now is very much based on digital product companies, so people putting out digital experiences, but it's probably true for many others as well. We're all usually working in our sprints, 2 to 3 weeks long, and aiming to have some part of the experience complete and shippable at the end of these sprints. So depending on your discipline, that's probably different. Pixel perfect design for designers, code for developers and engineers, product specifications, or evolving the roadmap, wherever that is for product managers as well. And along the way, we're probably defining a part of the experience, concepting, exploring it, trying to nuance it and evaluate it as well. And all of that all over again the next 2 to 3 weeks. So it's a pretty packed schedule and we're all quite maxed out. And then you add on top of that the rituals and all the other processes we need to keep in place to ensure we're delivering to quality. I think it's quite a credit to our disciplines and our work that we make the space and make the time to engage our customers and bring them into this process. But it's not surprising that when we're in this stressed environment, when we're doing a lot, we go to what we know. And what we usually go to in this context is usability testing. That's the tool we tend to pull on because it's trusted, it's reliable, and it's predictable. And it actually fits really well with this sprint process that we have because it helps us evaluate and get a certain confidence for what we're going to be pushing out into the world very soon. So it sort of just builds us up, bolsters us, and gets us ready to make decisions and make those calls final. But this is something I often hear. So isn't some feedback better than no feedback at all? This often happens when maybe you've been exploring a part of the product, you've been working on it for a while, and it's been through a few cycles of usability testing, so 3, 4, 5 times. And you're starting to hear similar patterns, it's repeating, and you have the feeling that you haven't heard something fresh or new. And that's when we start to think, well, don't feel like we learned that much, but at least we've confirmed where we're heading. So some feedback is better than having no feedback at all. The problem happens when there's bad news. So when we have a usability test that pulls up lots of negative feedback, or we hear expectations from customers that are contradictory to those we've been building towards, or needs have been surfaced that we weren't addressing at all. And often this can feel like a real meltdown moment, because it means a lot of rethinking, maybe going back to the drawing board, and if nothing else, some time that needs to be invested to readjust and adapt and rejig our plans. So I've often seen teams feel pretty stressed out and maxed when this happens. And I find that really unfortunate. Because if feedback starts to feel like failure, it's really no longer a moment of learning. And the purpose of research is to pull in feedback that leads to us learning. So it's kind of a waste or a loss of this moment that we are making such an effort to bring into the process. The way I like to position it or propose it is, if you are doing research for a certain amount of time in a certain part of your experience, and each time you confirm and you get positive feedback and everything's going swimmingly, essentially you're confirming the hypotheses that you kicked off with or you started the journey with. You haven't necessarily added or expanded on that set of hypotheses. It's only when you come up against slightly contradictory feedback or something that challenges the opinions that were originally in the team, or you are forced to rethink a certain part of the experience, that you actually grow what you learned, what you know about the customer, about their needs, about the problem space that you're working with. So speaking about failure, it's important to embrace a little bit of failure and bring it into your process in order to make sure that you're continuously learning. Randy mentioned the double diamond. I have it here too. It's a founding principle, I guess, of product management and product design. We all know this one: design the right thing, design it right. And when we look at where we invest a lot within research, we often do a lot of work up in the discover phase. So teams will take the time out. They'll do in-depth interviews. They might even do ethnographic research. They'll pull all the data, the surveys, the market research they have access to, and really take the time to investigate and build those initial hypotheses. But the fact is that we spend most of our lives working in this second half, the develop and deliver phase. And in that phase, we go into our pattern behaviors. So the question for me really is, how might we build exploration and inspiration throughout the process, and not just upfront during that initial discovery process? So today I'm going to try and share 3 approaches with you. They're really concrete, and I've tried to share tangible examples from N26 in order to make that real for you. I'll go pretty fast. Hopefully, we can clarify anything that comes up through Q&A. The first approach I like to call stop short. So think about the basic material we use for research. It's prototypes. And if we think about a prototype, it's essentially a journey, a story that we're telling our users. We're saying, you do thing 1, and if you do thing 2, then you have these 3 options, and you can choose between A, B, and C, and these are the final outcomes. So we take them on a little imaginative journey to imagine what would happen if they go through each step by step with the different materials or prompts that we have. If there's a gap in that journey, people fill it with their assumptions or what they know about other existing products or expectations they have because they're previous users of your product. And that can help to sort of smooth out the edges and make a journey flow within a prototype. Now, if you intentionally leave those gaps in the narrative, what you can do is dive deeper and actually investigate, what did people fill in? What were those assumptions or expectations that they used to complete your story? So an example I can share here is from Spaces. I hope some of you at least are familiar with our product. At N26, we have something called Spaces, the screen to the far left that you see. And it is essentially like little buckets for money. They're sub-accounts that are really easy to set up. They're a few clicks and you can have a space set up. And in this screen, you can see there's a main account, but then Brazil, vacation, or dining out, those are your spaces. And we built this feature and we were starting to explore what it would mean to share spaces. And we were in the really early phase. And instead of going out and sort of detailing out a whole imagined process and what it would work like in a full prototype, we decided to just sort of create these, what I like to call provocational screens or sacrificial concepts, and just threw a few additional details onto the existing screens that we had. So on the leftmost screen, you see these two interlinked circles that kind of indicate sharing. In the middle screen, you see the profile pictures. And we showed these to customers who use Spaces and asked them to think out loud. What do you think is going on here? What do you think this feature is? And they said, I think maybe this is a way for me to share my space. I don't know. And we were able to probe further and find out, what do you think that feature would be useful for? Would you use it? Who would you want to share it with? And through that kind of conversational process, we were able to uncover the use cases that people might have, who they might consider trustworthy, or who was a little too far from their circle to bring into a shared space, and understand their needs and considerations in this space. To the right, you see the settings screen, and at the bottom, there's a section called Members, which was literally just added on to the existing settings screen that we had. And we asked people to say what they thought would happen when they clicked on New Contributor. And they described sort of the invitation process, how they expected it to work. They'd go to their contacts list, pull up a contact that they know, and be able to send them an invitation. They also talked about how they would need to be able to get rid of someone if things went wrong. And we had a really interesting learning from that process. Even though this was sharing money, you were bringing someone into your bank account, the expectation people had around what the ease of that process would be like was the same as WhatsApp or Messenger. The benchmark that they were using to describe the process was messaging apps. So that really helped us understand just how easy and seamless we'd need to make this experience of inviting people to share a space with customers. I want to say at this point that this is not the only way to, of course, stop short. Having sacrificial concepts or provocational screens is just one way. You can also have like a partial prototype that you use. But another way that's one of my favorites is actually just using really simple drawn screens or wireframes. I know they're not popular anymore, but they work really well when you want to give your users or your research participants permission to question everything, to question all the fundamentals. It tells them that nothing is precious here. You can critique absolutely everything. So that's one method or one approach that I want to try and bring back into favor. The second approach I've called layer the cake. So every time you have a great digital experience, there's so many things working in concert. There's the business model, there's the product concept, the UI and navigation, there's visual design, illustration, imagery, great copy, gestures, micro interactions. There's so much going on working together to create an amazing experience. Now, if there's something not working and we test it and explore it and try to solve it with everything sandwiched together, we risk either not solving the problem correctly or completely, or potentially damaging something that was actually working well. So in this case, what I recommend that you do is try to have a hypothesis-based approach where you try to form an initial idea of where the problem might lie, isolate that layer, and actually test and explore within that layer specifically. So I'll use an example that's kind of old from N26. So early in 2019, we had these 3 tiers. We have a free tier on the left, which is the clear card, the standard product, and then a black and a metal tier, both paid products. And we were looking into how we might lift the upgrade numbers. How can we encourage more of our customers to upgrade to a paid tier? And of course, we were looking at the product composition. Are they the right benefits? Are people engaged by them? Is it the right price point? And all of that. But one of our designers had a hunch. He felt that perhaps we just didn't have this option well placed within the product. So this is the screen where it used to sit. This is what we call the My Account screen. And this green bar was where you could go in, click in, and investigate more to learn about the different membership options that you could potentially go to. And his hunch was that this was just not where people expected to find an upgrade option. And also it wasn't engaging enough. It wasn't pulling people in. So we isolated that layer and we did card sorting and tree testing just around the information architecture. And he was right. People did not expect to be going to this part of the app to upgrade their account. Of course, I'd like to say it was a straightforward journey from there to the solution, but it never is. And there was a lot of other research that we needed to do to arrive at the final solution. But where we landed was rethinking an entire tab within the product and launching what we call the Explore tab, where, as you can see, there's a lot more real estate dedicated to describing the product, creating a beautiful picture to narrate what the product is about as well, and entice customers to explore it. This definitely had an uplift and definitely made an impact on our upgrades. But if you're familiar with our product, you also know that we phased out Black in the middle of last year, and we released a new product tier called U with different features and also different card colors and all of that. So all that to say, solving one part of the problem doesn't mean you've solved all of them. You do need to investigate and make sure that you are looking at all the different angles. But by isolating the problem and specifically solving it, you reduce the risk of accidentally damaging other parts of the experience that are working well. And then the third approach I'd like to share called go to the extremes. So when we design our product experiences, we have an idea of how we think people will use it. And when we do research, especially when we do usability testing, we often reach out to what we would consider typical users or typical usage behaviors. With stable products or like experiences that have reached a certain level of maturity, it can be really helpful to reach out to the extremes, to people who are literally misusing your product or using it in ways that you never anticipated, or even people who reject the product and don't want to use it. That's because they have much more articulated points of view around why they do or do not use it and how they use it. And uncovering those points of view can really help you to investigate opportunities and think about what next for your product. So going back to spaces, when we concepted this product initially, we really thought of it as like really easy money buckets or pockets or just easy spaces to put your money away. So the typical behavior we had anticipated was that people would have a couple of spaces, maybe one with a really specific goal, like a holiday, where you have an amount you're aiming towards and maybe a date that you're aiming towards as well. And perhaps a second space, which is a rainy day space, a place where you put money aside for emergencies. And that's very much also what we saw with a lot of our customers. But once the product was stable, we started to investigate what should we do next? How can we improve and build upon this? And we looked into the range of behaviors, and we found there were users who had 8, 9, 10 spaces, so way more than we had anticipated. And then also users who had signed in and tried the space and set up one maybe and had a couple of transactions, but then kind of petered out. They were engaged in 26 customers, but they weren't using spaces. So we brought those people in and did really in-depth interviews, talking to them about how they had found the experience, what they were using it for, or what was stopping them from using it. The interesting thing with the people who had 8, 9, 10 spaces was they were essentially doing really detailed budgeting with their spaces. So they'd move from a savings use case to a budgeting use case. And that really helped us think beyond what we were doing at the moment and expand the feature sets that would enable better budgeting. But the other really fun feature that came out of it that I'd like to share today is the lock space functionality. So this was from people who said, we love that you can just drag and drop money from one space to another, but I have to see, I hope the animation's working. I don't think it is. That's unfortunate. I'll just have to describe it to you. But essentially, with lock spaces, what you can do is lock a space so that you can't take money out of it. Because the way that we've designed it is really easy to move your money between your different spaces. You can just drag and drop. But for many people, that was too easy. So it prevented them from staying committed to the savings goals that they'd set themselves. It was too easy to go back on a commitment you've made and, indulge in an online shopping spree that you hadn't anticipated. So they wanted us to create a little bit more friction, to have more steps in the way, actually, which is the opposite of what you're normally trying to do with creating a really smooth, seamless experience. So we added the functionality where you can set up a specific space so that you lock it, and then you can always put money in, but you can't take money out. And that's the kind of functionality that we were able to surface by talking to those outliers, the people on the edges of our typical usage. So these are the three methods or approaches I wanted to share. Stop short, which is great for understanding what assumptions or expectations people are going to bring to your experience. Layer the cake, which helps you isolate and really identify where exactly your problems might lie. And going to the extremes, which can help you ideate and think beyond and uncover opportunities for your product. So I hope I've shown you that a little failure can actually go a long way. By accumulating little failures, by intentionally seeking out some dead ends and exploring places that are not working well within the product, you can actually grow your understanding of your customers and of your product and your problem space. And that research isn't cookie cutter. Research isn't just implementing a specific methodology. It's really a process of creatively exploring how to understand a problem. If you think of an A/B test, you really need to set it up right. It needs to have the well-controlled criteria, well-controlled parameters, and you also need to make sure that you have well-formed, well-framed hypotheses. In a similar way, every piece of research is an experiment, and it needs to be designed well to ensure that it's the right environment and there's the right stimuli that gets the right feedback from customers. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll be able to take that and put that into your work.
Thanks very much, Shruti.
Thank you.
Really great advice, I think, and some very vivid examples from your work. Thanks for sharing. So if anyone has questions for Shruti, then as with Randy, please submit them to the comment stream on YouTube. There'll be a Q&A following the next talk. Speaking of which, is Eli ready behind the scenes? 2 thumbs up. It's very ready. So welcome, Eli. I'll leave it to you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit about user-centered design. There are some methods I'm going to cover very lightly and very briefly in this talk, but I did put together a whole page on Notion, and you can check out my tweets later. So there's some incentive for you to follow me on Twitter if you want access to the slides, as well as a special resources page that I put together with a bibliography. You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter, and it'll be out later tonight. So the first thing I want to do is just take a second and pause. I'm also giving this talk in London, and the theme there is Black Mirror. And so when we think about Black Mirror and the way the world is working today, it's very different from what it was a couple of months ago. And as the world is different, so too the things that are happening to us are different. And you might feel stressed, you might feel sad or upset, you might feel like we basically live in a hellscape dystopia, and you're probably not alone in that feeling. But the thing about Black Mirror, and the thing that I find really interesting about that whole choice is, when you turn your phone screen off, for example, it's a reflective surface. And that's kind of where they got the title of Black Mirror, is technology reflecting us. And in the same way, the reason I think we need to move beyond human-centered design tonight, which I'll unpack for you, is that the Black Mirror is kind of our fault. Mike Montero says that the world isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work, and we're the ones who designed it. And so when we think about human-centered design, I think one of the biggest myths in thinking about human-centered design is that it's like this new thing, but it's really not. We've been doing human-centered design since the invention of the automobile, and long before that. I mean, the history of civilization is basically human-centered design. And in that way, I think human-centered design is actually a very old practice that we've gathered a lot of new language for, but it's not really something that's fundamentally new. And I think it reflects last century's thinking about how we should think, and putting humans at the pinnacle of experience design actually undermines both the quality of products as well as the business of building products. You know, in human-centered design, we're taught that this is kind of the pyramid to strive for, right? It's like your base is usable, and then useful and desirable and delightful and meaningful. And all you have to do to build a really great product is like try to get, you know, a thin slice across everything, and you've got a really knockout product. And I think that one of the problems and challenges with this framing is that usable products can sometimes make us thoughtless. You know, one of the things that research has shown is that sometimes, you know, there's a book called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. And when we ask users not to think, and when we disengage people's brains, we can make them thoughtless. You see this through online abuse patterns and the way that people hide behind anonymity and avatars on the internet to attack people, hurt their feelings, perpetuate abuse. I mean, all sorts of things, right? Useful products can actually be wasteful. Desirable products can be addictive. Delightful products can sometimes be frivolous. And meaningful products, depending on where you're putting your meaning, can make us self-centered. And so as we think about how to build better products, which I want to talk to you about this evening, I want us to just keep this in mind and remember that, like, human-centered design may not be the best thing. You know, we've been taught that Mary, for example, is the pinnacle of who we should be paying attention to. And while I don't want to like knock the work that Randy and Shruti presented, because I think it's very good in terms of understanding a person's issues and really digging into what's going on with the person that you're designing for, I think that that's certainly important. But design is bigger than just Mary. And I think what we heard in what Shruti was saying was, we want to understand that person, their life, who they're working with, what their situation is, and look beyond them, right? We don't want to just design for the one person using this one app right now. And I think that one of the things that Shruti's research found out was, you know, this was about managing money in context. It wasn't just about really thinking about how do I optimize this UI and increase conversions, but how do I help somebody manage their money more effectively, which is a very different sort of question and a much better question than how do we optimize conversions, right? Which is an important one, especially in product management where we're trying to get really good results, but it's not the only question worth asking. And the funny thing is as we start thinking about people who we're designing for, you know, we're in this very strange place where the systems that we've designed are now designing us. You know, you can see human-centered design everywhere you look. And in some ways, the systems have run away from us. And, you know, there's that infamous title of the inmates running the asylum. And I think this headline really, really spoke to me and grabbed my attention when I started thinking about this talk, because we have a system that's self-perpetuating where airlines, to maintain the availability, have been forced to sign on to some SLAs, right? And those SLAs are basically flying empty planes above our skies for the sake of a regulation that wasn't really designed to change. And I think it's really important for us to recognize things like this. You might be thinking, okay, what is like this headline of like some weird government regulation in travel have to do with me as a product manager and building a product? Well, a decade ago, you know, just under a decade ago, Mark Andreessen wrote about how software was eating the world, right? And predicted very, saliently and prophetically that we would live in a world that was mostly software. And a decade later, 2020, software is the world. 70% of enterprises have apps in the cloud, and almost everything we do from our phones, which are really not phones, but computers that have, progressed far beyond the original mobile phone. They're just ubiquitous. Software is everywhere. Software runs everything. And so when we think about the world, software is the world. And if we're going to build a better world, we have to build better software. The 10 largest companies in the world, of them, 7 are tech companies. And so it's not irrelevant to think about and talk about how might we really hold ourselves accountable and also think about how to build a better future. And I think one of the things that's essential in doing that is moving beyond human-centered design. It's really like putting humans in a broader context and asking for us to, unfuck the world, as I said in the subtitle of this talk, by using a bigger lens. So I think it's really important because as we think about how the world is built, the systems that we've designed, whether they be the apps we use, the social media we're interested in, the tweets we're putting out, whatever, we use a lot of these applications every day. They're kind of built into the way that we live now. Even now, I'm like using TweetDeck and StreamYard and a bunch of other stuff to share and broadcast with you and connect with you. And that's a really good thing. But it can also have its drawbacks, and we have to be aware of those, because I love this illustration. But the systems that we've designed are very much designing us. Apps designed for convenience have now put us in a place where the average person has a much larger carbon footprint than they used to. So how do we actually move beyond human-centered design? Well, I think one of my big inspirations here is this random chef. His name is Dan Barber. He runs a farm-to-table restaurant and a farm called Blue Hill Farms. And Dan is a systems thinker, and I don't know if he thinks of himself that way. I didn't actually get to talk to him for this talk, but I watched Chef's Table on Netflix, and he's in one of the episodes in the first season. And Dan was, really working on this problem of how do you build really delicious food? How do you serve really delicious food? And went right back to the source. And I think one of the things that was really important and powerful about going back to the source is Dan started looking at the farm as a system, as an ecology, as a life, and has actually done some really amazing things. And I think we could all stand to learn a little bit from adjacent industries. And Randy Silver is actually a big proponent of this, is learning from other people out there who are making good decisions and doing great work. And I think that one of the things that we could do when we look at the farm to table movement is look at how we leverage ecology and look at how we leverage systems thinking and building better products for the next decade of product management. So I've got 4 really simple principles to talk you through today, and I'll give you some examples. And again, you don't have to remember all of this. And I do have a Notion page with a ton of stuff, including some how-to guides for things like some service blueprinting and stuff that we'll cover in this section. So the 4 principles, very briefly, are uncover systems and impacts, reframe where you measure value, focus on what you can control, and then take regenerative action. So in uncovering systems and impacts, like I said before, I think we have to push ourselves beyond measuring product success at the individual level. I think we've done this really well in the last decade, almost to a fault. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. When we look at Uber, for example, Uber has a pretty good adoption rate. It's fairly well used, aside from London, where they're having some legal trouble. But Uber actually is not that great for the environment. And I remember Uber's product positioning a couple years ago was that they were going to take cars off the road and help less people drive by basically existing alongside public transit as a form of, infrastructure. But what we've seen is that, the individual experience of getting to and from somewhere in an Uber all on your own is great. But what ends up happening is that the average carbon footprint of Uber and Lyft has almost 70% higher than the carbon footprint of the taxi companies that they're replacing, because those drivers are on and off, they're idling more, they're driving around waiting to find an area where there's demand. And so they're actually having a bigger impact on the environment, and all that for convenience, right? So human-centered design and the demands of convenience have put us in a place where the average customer, not thinking about anything but the convenience and the to and from factor, is having a much bigger carbon footprint than they would otherwise. And I think it's really important to note and to be aware of. And so as we think about uncovering systems and impacts, I think one of the things that we could do differently is leverage some of the existing tools that we have, like a service blueprint and a journey map. I don't have a whole big how-to because the time constraints on this talk are really hard to get into any of these in super detail, but there's a ton of really great content out there. And if you check out my slides after, I've put together a Notion page as well as some other how-to guides and pulled some things from the Nielsen Norman group so that you can be exposed to some of these tools if you've never used a service blueprint or a journey map before. There's some new tools that I came across when doing some research for this talk, and they're tools that I've used but without formal names. And the rich picture method is basically a service diagram that looks at the entire journey. And while you might typically think of like your front desk app or your therapy app, it kind of forces you to look at all the people, all the actors, if you will, behaving across a system. And then a service ecology helps you understand the big, the 5 W's, right? Who, what, when, where, how, and why. And I think that these two tools, again, there's a little bit more about them in the follow-up, but you can use these tools to start to uncover who's in your system, what is it about, right? So if we take the example of Uber, what is the driver's experience? What is their life? What does driving look like for them? How do we optimize that experience? How do we give them a more rewarding sense of satisfaction, right? Rather than driving down wages, for example. How might we understand the relationships and the financial pressures that put people in a place where they want to drive for Uber or do deliveries for Deliveroo or whatever it is, right? And I think that one of the things that we could do better in the next decade of building products is reframing where we measure value. Because, you might look at some of this talk and say, well, okay, that's all well and good, but like, is this just like environmentalism masquerading as a product talk? And I don't think it is. I found a really interesting article on Substack this week while I was doing research for the talk about pizza arbitrage. And basically, to give you some high-level talking points on this, I think one of the things that was really interesting about this is DoorDash, when they move into a new area, will list restaurants that are not listed with them or partnering with them. And they will list them and basically order food from those restaurants and pay them full price, but discount it in their own app. So a pizza shop owner noticed that his own pizzas were selling for $16 on DoorDash, and they were being charged, or they were charging $24 in the restaurant for the same pizza. So the owner of this pizza shop decided to do something really interesting and order a bunch of pizzas from DoorDash at the current rate. So they paid DoorDash $160, and the DoorDash driver showed up and paid $240 for the same pizza. And so all we're doing is just kind of cycling money through. And, this isn't the only business model that has this problem, but it is one that I think is really, really, really apparent. And when we do this kind of work, and when we think about this kind of product, measuring value at the individual transaction level is probably a really terrible way to go if you're trying to compete in the delivery space, because the margins are razor thin. There's a lot of logistics infrastructure, and it's really hard to do well. And the more that you invest in it, actually, the less you gain. When you look at the profit versus loss for these companies, DoorDash in all of 2019 made $900 million in revenue and lost $450 million in profit. Grubhub in Q1 of this year made $360 million total and lost $33 million. And then Uber Eats had they spent 1.2 billion to make 734 million US dollars. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we really need to question, like, where are we measuring value and who is this valuable to, right? Besides some execs at SoftBank, like, what is the real value in this system? Because when you think about the driver or the delivery person, that person is not going to have the same experience or the same quality of life. And the business itself, right? The tech company that's kind of injecting itself between customers and the restaurant is working to squeeze capital out of both sides of it, but not really doing a successful job at actually adding sustainable value. The margins are going down and everyone is losing, right? When you build a product like this that focuses on measuring value kind of on the transaction level, you're not actually getting a really smart, really substantial value-adding product. And in this case, it's a race to the bottom, but it's kind of a bad race to the bottom because we haven't fundamentally added a whole lot of value to the market. And as we think about that, you might say, well, okay, cool, but I don't work at DoorDash and I don't know what to do. And so principle 3 is for you, which is focus on what you can control, because you can't control everything. And you're not SoftBank, but you can do something and you can have a positive impact in what you're doing just by being you. I like to use the spheres of control, or the circles of influence model, to kind of think about these things. And one of the things that you can control really, really easily is something that Johanna Coleman in her Mind the Product talk from MTP Engage Hamburg shared, is that you can focus on your own understanding of the systems, how information flows between people. So like your team, how do y'all understand your mission, your vision, your values? How do you prioritize what gets shared and who can control information in that system, right? And information could be anything. It could be, what are our OKRs? What are our goals? What are we working for? What is the customer value that we're trying to achieve? What does the world look like if we're wildly successful? Those are all questions that I think can start to move us in the right direction. And so do you have alignment on those issues? And do you have a clear sense of value that your team is sharing? And if not, as a product manager, what are you doing to help create that? When it comes to influence, things that you can negotiate and influence are finding your external impacts and how to reduce them, right? You can't go hunting for everything that your product does that's negative in the world, but how do you build a response plan if you do find something, right? If somebody complains about abuse on your platform or in your product, how quickly do you prioritize that? Does it sit stale in a backlog, or do you try to work your influence on behalf of the customers who are suffering? If you have incentives and measurements that you're using, right, ultimately follow the money, right? Where are the incentives coming from? How do you think about incentives? If you're a product leader, how do you structure incentives for your team? Because sometimes the way that we set up incentives and the world we say we want are in direct competition with each other. How do people learn about secondary impacts and what's going on, right? So if we think about measuring value or where we put our focus, how do we get people to care about that? And how do we help people take action on things when we do find them, right? So if an abuse issue crops up in your system and it seems low priority, like, how do you advocate for that? How do you build a shared understanding? How do you give people actions to take in response to things that you see in your product that aren't great? And, you know, when it comes to concern, like those are things that you can't necessarily control, right? Like industry level impacts, advocating for policy change, working on big structural and societal issues. You should be concerned with those things, but if you try to control them, they will drive you crazy. So make sure that you balance and focus on what you can control, both at work and at home. And then finally, take regenerative action. And this principle is all about doing really good stuff, because I think it seems really, really big and daunting, right? But every product manager and every product has things that they can be doing to reduce their footprint and to put people in a better place. This is the UK at night, and I found out a really interesting fact when I was doing research for this talk, and I'd like to shout out Layla Akaroglu, I think. She's in the resource guide in Notion, which will be part of my slides. But basically, the UK's streetlights for one night could be powered by the excess energy that is spent with people overfilling their tea kettles every single day. So the energy that you use making tea today, if everyone would just fill their kettle to the level that they need it, i.e. 1 or 2 cups rather than filling it full, you could power all of the UK's streetlights for a single night. And that's an energy trade-off that people are making every single day. There's actually a guy who features in her TED Talk, and his job is to sit there and watch television and buy nuclear energy from France for when commercial breaks go on, because inevitably when the most popular shows in the UK are on, the grid takes a big hit and we need to buy surplus energy from France to meet that demand, because everyone boils tea at the same time. And I think that the really interesting thing about that is that the next decade of product demands better from us. We can do better and we can be smarter. I mean, we've come this far. You know, 10 years ago, product management was something that was still working to claw its way into prominence. And now, like, here we are, and we are building really amazing, really good products. But there's also so many challenges that we could be more proactive about in this next decade. You know, and this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's not big, but having a 1 cup minimum down at the bottom, it can help people make good decisions about how much to use. And that's the kind of proactive intervention that I think more products should take on, right? And as we think about, like, what does that mean, you know, in the big picture, when we look at systems and when we think about impacts and kind of reducing those impacts, I think it's really important to not just look at that button click or that interface, right? But like, what is that customer journey, right? And how does that fit within some overall structure? And how does that structure fit within a system, whether it's an economy or a nation state or an international system? And then how does that fit in an ecosystem, right? How does it impact the world and the environment and everything else? And when you think about it, another fun fact that I learned doing some research for this talk is that if you sent one less email that was completely unnecessary, just one less email per day, you could fly 81,000 times between London and Barcelona. So 81,000 flights is the carbon footprint of every wasteful email that everyone in the UK sends in a single day. And I've got those stats and more for you in the resource guide. So let's wrap it up. I think as we think about the old design pyramid and kind of the things there on the left, useful, usable, desirable, meaningful, and delightful, what I'd like us to do is think about how might we build better, more responsible products in the next decade? How might we start with a foundation of responsibility and move our way up towards being regenerative? And I want to give a special thanks to Jenka Gerfinkel at BabyJenks on Twitter, who did a really similar reimagined pyramid for healthcare design and the healthcare use case. So, you know, as we think about how we push products in the next decade, I think encouraging ourselves and challenging each other to be more responsible, to be more empowering, to be more sustainable, and to ultimately like have a regenerative impact on the world is something that we could all aspire to. And rather than just being meaningful and making people selfish or self-centered, how do we get people to contribute towards each other's lives and think about society-centered design. Thanks. That's it. So you can say hi to me on Twitter. I will tweet some resources, including a link to the Notion page that I've put together for this talk. And you can follow me on Twitter at Intentional. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Eli. Really thought-provoking talk. And very much a very different angle from the earlier two. So I think we're going to have an interesting discussion now. I will bring in Shruti and Randy to join us. Cool. Welcome back, everyone. It feels a bit more like a Zoom call now. I feel more comfortable, weirdly. It's so let's start with this one. So I guess this touches on all of your talks in some ways. The question is, how can we make our stakeholders more open to failure and stopping short and to challenging ethical consequences of our products? So any volunteers to kick us off? Big question.
Trudy.
Oh, thanks for passing me the bar. I definitely, it was born from your talk, but I can give it a shot. I mean, this is such a big question, right? This is not simple. And I think my approach to this is very much like you were saying, Eli, start with what you can control. And the things you can control is choosing where you work, making sure that you align in values and principles with the organization that you choose to serve and provide your time and energy and all your effort to, your skills and talents. So make sure that you're working in an organization where you feel if you were to raise questions like this, if you were to challenge, you would be heard and that there would be an honest discussion about it. That's about as much as we can all try. And I think from there, the other speakers have made good points about how at the end of the day, a lot of these decisions are just good business decisions. They're what create a sustainable long-term business. It's not about looking at what happens tomorrow and in the next 2 months. It's about what happens. It's the reference is the infinite game is I think a good reference here. Like what is the objective that you're trying to achieve, and what is the role that you're willing to play within that ecosystem?
That's a really great one. One of the tools that I've used in the past is I call them dystopia stories. The name is TBD, but basically I do user stories from the perspective of what is the worst possible thing that could happen. So, we've got, Jen, the delivery driver who is delivering, and you're talking about proposing a cut to the wages that you pay your drivers. Well, guess what? I can advocate for Jen by writing a user story from her perspective and go, as Jen, I have bills to pay and you're about to cut my fucking wages. Fuck you. What that can do is it can totally open the conversation and get people thinking about, oh, wait, this isn't just a margins game or a numbers game. There is a human impact to these things. And if somebody says, yeah, don't do that, that's not appropriate, find somewhere else to work.
Roshi Proven has a really good take on this as well. She did a talk at ProductTank London last year and also did it on our podcast, talking, as you did, Eli, about Black Mirror. And I think it's an inclusive one where you imagine for any feature that you're working on, what is the Black Mirror episode that could be written about it? And then the thing about that might be a little bit different than your take on it, Eli, is yours is you write the story. This one is the entire team gets together and everyone has the ability to imagine that dystopia. Where it goes. The other one in terms of failure and stopping short is change the language that you're using. We love to talk about fail fast. No executive ever wants to hear the word fail. Talk about learn fast. They want to talk about the ROI that you get from not wasting time and effort on other things, but make sure you're using language that is friendly to them.
And de-risking. I think a lot of it is also about talking about risk and how much risk are you actually taking out of the equation by doing some of these approaches. And the term I had heard myself last year was abusability testing, which I really love. Good. It's a really good one.
And then actually, there's another one. A woman named Liz Keogh has this great way of estimating complexity because, you know, your CFO especially always wants to know, when am I getting it and how much is it going to cost? And she has 5 stages. One is, our team has done this before and we know exactly how to do it. The next one is, someone on the team has done it and we know exactly how to do it, but who knows who's going to be doing that task this time. The next one is, someone in the company has done it. Well, do you have access to them? Next one is, another company has done it, but do you know if you have the same conditions and same ability to do it? And the last one is, no one has ever done this before. And your confidence in your estimate is going to go completely screwy the higher up that chain that you go. And it's a fantastic way of taking that confidence multiplier into any discussions with somebody like a CFO.
Cool, great. So next question from Alana. So how easy or not have you found pivoting or changing priorities during COVID times? Is there anything that you feel that's worked particularly well with the teams you work with, and anything you feel has gone particularly badly?
I'm a consultant, so I'm going to leave it to you people who actually have jobs.
Okay. Pivoting or changing priorities, I think, is something that it depends, right? If there is a need to change those priorities, like, I suppose the question I would ask is, what are you doing, you know, to leverage some of the things that Shruti was talking about to really like make sure that you have a shared understanding? Because unless everyone's seeing the same issue, you're not going to get anywhere. So the first question I would ask is like, why do you think a pivot is necessary? And are you the only one who thinks that? Do you have any allies? Do you have anyone else who shares that understanding or that belief or sees the same things that you do? And if you do, how do you then start to bring other people on board and create that shared understanding? Because if you try to just advocate for change for its own sake, you're not going to get people to move with you. And what you really want more than anything else is for people to move with you rather than to kind of like pull, you know, and drag people kicking and screaming against their will. So working to create that shared understanding can make it much easier. And so asking yourself, who sees the same problem? And if they don't, like, why not? Do we have the same facts? Do we have the same perspective? If we don't, like, what are we doing differently? Are we looking at like the numbers or the market conditions or whatever else it is to kind of move us forward?
Yeah, I think so. Pivoting or changing directions really abruptly is never easy, and it needs to be really well considered, both for the teams to be successful, but also to be confident you're making good choices. But one of the things we've done that I think has been quite helpful overall with these conversations is starting to like distribute the information and create listening across the organization. So trying to turn everyone in the company into a sensor. So whether it's articles you're reading or things you're observing or how things are shifting within your specific part of the business. And we have sort of created a channel where we can amalgamate and bring all of that information together. To your point, Eli, of like, does everyone have a similar picture of what's going on? And whether that's, you know, what we're hearing from customers or what we're seeing in the numbers, but then also what other people are out there reporting. I think one big resource in this time has been all the amazing reports and research being done by different organizations, and they're just generously putting it out there for all of us to learn from and benefit from. A little experiment we did as a design team and research team was to do a future casting exercise. And it's super hard to do, but like 1 month into it, we were like, okay, based on what we know, let's just try and throw this into the future and see what happens. That doesn't mean that, you know, that was it. And then the product teams were like, right, that's what we're building. But I think we were laying the ground for starting to have those conversations about what might we need to change or do differently, given how the world might look like in a few months.
Shruti, do you think you'll continue doing those on a regular basis?
I think they were such a helpful exercise, and also it can be really lightweight. It doesn't need to be a really, you know, of course you can do really professional future casting as well. And I wish I could get more time and resource to do something like that. But just throwing ourselves a little into the future every few months might be a really good exercise for keeping ourselves fresh, for keeping ourselves innovative, having avenues to keep exploring and, you know, pushing ourselves. I agree. I would if I could.
So I think maybe this is kind of a nice follow-on question, right? So we were speaking a bit more strategically in terms of responding to COVID, but obviously one of the most basic things if you're doing research, so as I guess you are at the moment, Shruti, is how do you do it when you can't get to the people? So do you have any tips for running remote user research or how you've done it so far?
Actually, I think we're all adapting to this world really well. So taking our research online hasn't been super challenging. I think the tools are out there. They're great tools for conducting remote research, whether that's look back or user testing or usability hub. There's loads. I'm not calling those three out specifically, but go explore and find the right tool for yourself. They're really easy to use most of the time and not complicated. So the right tools are out there, but also if you don't have a lot of the different tools, just get on a video call, and you can have a really honest conversation. Maybe you need to put a little extra effort into building connection, spending some time at the start to really build rapport with the person. But one of the fun advantages of now doing remote research is you're in people's homes. So you can ask them, like, show me the thing that you love about you're in the coffee business. Show us your coffee machine. Tell us, how you go about your ritual. You can do a lot more of show and don't tell because of this situation. So definitely embrace it. All the principles of doing good research apply. Don't lead. Don't have sort of questions that are too directive. Be open and curious. All of that is true. And then use the tools that help you expand that. I think one thing I will call out, though, is who is not online. Who are the people who you will not reach because they don't use digital products or they're not digitally savvy? They're not going to respond to an online outreach program. That's what you need to keep an eye on and make sure that you're not accidentally losing sight of certain user groups.
There's a company I work with as part of my consultancy called Motivate Design in New York that has a different approach as well. It's called Insider Insight. And the idea is that you don't need to talk to your customers. You need to actually listen to them. Talking to them can be marketing. And it's also, we only talk to the people that we get access to, exactly as you were just saying, Shruti. But we've developed this group of insiders who break all the rules about research in that they ask tons of leading questions. They have tons of bias, but they're talking to their friends and their family members and people. So because we get that second degree of access through them, we'll get to people that we've never gotten to before. And it's not good for usability testing, but it's great at if you're doing OKRs or personas or early stage discovery or grow, pivot, kill, where you're really trying to be open about what the problem space might be and whether you've got the right problem space. And I know so what we do is that we put the question out to our insiders and a target persona. They say, yes, I found someone who fits that persona that I want to have this conversation with. They talk for 15 or 30 minutes and they give us the recording and we get a transcript. And I know when I look at that transcript or listen to the recording, if people are cursing, then they're being honest and they're telling their friends something that they would never tell me. And then you do your normal synthesis and you get some amazing insights from that. And then you can go back and do further usability and things like that. And you'll have gotten access to people you never would have gotten to before.
Yeah, I think one of the tools that we've been using is Playbook UX, and not to call them out specifically, you can use Envision and literally anything else to kind of test ideas. But there is so much value in just get on the phone with somebody. You can look at them face to face now. Almost everyone has an internet connection, at least in Berlin and England. It'll be fine. And then the other thing is, as you ask questions, right, make sure that you're doing different kinds of research, like Shruti was saying. Don't just go in for usability testing and showing somebody some screens. Actually ask them about their ideas and hey, tell me about, I work in cars, so tell me about the last time you bought a car. What was that like? And we just did that last week. And so it was very different having people tell us about their commute from their home. Oh, what's your car like? Could you show it to me? Have you driven it recently? Oh, no, but I used to commute 90 minutes before the lockdown, and this is how it was like. And, there's where I put my coffee every morning. And you can get a lot more insight in some ways now than you could before, but you just have to look for the opportunities and keep an open mind.
Cool. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm conscious that both Eli and Randy actually are about another product tank elsewhere. So I'm going to give you 2 questions as the final bit, and they're not related, but you can maybe have to answer both. Partly because I know I spoke to Randy just the other day about one of these. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. So we have the question from VJ, which is, as technology is taking over the world, do we all need to learn coding and technology? What technical expertise should leaders have? I guess implicitly also, as a product manager, what technical expertise should you have? So that's one question. And then the follow-up, which is kind of a different angle, is, so have you been in an organization where everyone knows the design jargon, they're all talking the talk, but no one's actually doing anything actionable? And if so, I guess, what have you done? How can you fix that? So we can start with you, Randy, perhaps.
Okay. In terms of how technical do you have to be, I'd say technical enough to have a decent discussion with someone and be able to ask good questions and get them to explain things to you. You need to have a good generalist understanding. But I can't code, and but I can go to a dev team and say, this is what we're trying to do. It seems like it's this plus this, and it should make sense. Tell me why that's not the case. Tell me what's so hard about it, and explain it to me so that I can go and translate that to other people and say it's going to take longer because this does not fit with that. And that doesn't need to be just words. You can use diagrams. You can use lots of other things, but it's more of a storytelling approach because other people will fill in all the details, but you need to be able to ask the right questions to understand, is this something I need to understand, or is this something that's a little bit too difficult? But just convince me and make me trust you that you know what you're talking about on this.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to talk on that one, or should we go into?
Yeah, I work as a designer. I'm the head of UX at Kazoo, and the should designers code debate always comes up. And the way I think about it, kind of going back to a point that I didn't really get to flesh out in my timeline on the talk, is farm-to-table thinking. And I think that regardless of whether you're a product manager, a designer, or whatever it is, you should have farm-to-table thinking. And I think when you really dig in and think about the system, you should understand the ingredients that build your product and your user experience. No matter what level you're at, you should get invested in understanding them at the best level that you possibly can for you. For some people, that will inevitably mean learning to code because they like that part of it, right? But you don't have to go grow the peppers yourself to understand the soil and understand the acidity in that soil and how it's going to impact the flavor of the dish that you're making in the restaurant, right? And so to totally abuse an analogy, I think that that's the way that we should be thinking about it, right? And like whether you actually care about all that stuff or not, you should be able to have a good conversation about the flavor that you're trying to deliver to your customers and the way that you're going to achieve that flavor by what you do with the peppers that you're growing, right? And that might be the code, the APIs, the whatever that you're putting together to make an experience. And so I encourage the designers and the product managers in my team to take that farm-to-table thinking approach and just give a damn about the ingredients no matter what they are.
Yeah, I can only agree with both of you. I think what I would say is there needs to be mutual curiosity. We need to be really curious and want to understand the guts of things, the technology that's building the experiences we're creating. And equally, I would love for engineers and the technical people to take an interest in understanding the design perspective, the product perspective, the customer point of view, or the ecosystem point of view, if that's what we're talking about.
And as far as like jargon versus action, I find that that comes from a lack of clarity. And so if you are lacking for clarity and you're a design leader in that organization, what could you do to create clarity? What can you do to create shared understanding, And if you're not, how can you bring the right people together so that you can achieve that clarity, right? So, it can be as simple as asking 2 questions. What do we know and why should we care, right? And that might be where you start a discussion, and those questions seem irreverent, but they're really not. And if you get the right people in the room and be like, okay, what do we know about design or about this product or about our users? And why should we care, right? That could be a very strong way to start a conversation about what you should be doing and what strategy should be. Because if you can't get to anything actionable, It might be that people are operating from completely different playbooks or different understandings of what design's role is. And so kind of like ask that question up and down the layer of strategy, you know, up and down the ladder of strategy, and like think about, okay, are we not executing well? Are we not planning to execute well? Are we not setting strategy at the right level? Are we not communicating strategy? Do we have no shared alignment? Is our North Star completely broken, right? Like, and as you kind of move up that strategy ladder, you can kind of isolate which layer it is, which again is one of the things that Shruti was pointing out. And it doesn't just apply to user research, it applies to almost anything that we do.
Speaking about working in consulting, I agree. Clients are thin on the ground right now. I've wrapped up an interim role right as lockdown began, and it has been a little bit slow. So I wrote a book, I started a meetup, I wrote a talk, I run some experiments of free events and done things like that, all to learn from people around me and to just do things from a promotional perspective and be proactive and productive. And I understand that not everyone has the bandwidth or to do it right now, but if you're looking for something to do with no clients in sight, just figure out what can you do from a marketing and promotion perspective at the very least.
Personally, I've never been in an organization where everyone knows the design jargon. That's always surprising, or at least has the same understanding of those words. But yeah, I think the challenge is often that the design has been almost processized, like five-step process to get an amazing outcome. And we need to unpick whether, you know, what process were you trained on and what did you understand from each of those steps, and sort of differentiate that from doing actual design, which is making things.
Awesome.
Experiences.
I feel like we should all hang out and do this again.
This sounds good.
This is real good.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, so that's our final question. Thank you to Eli, Shruti, and Randy for 3 wonderful talks and a nice open Q&A round. I'm quite impressed that we haven't had any technical issues. So I think that's a success as well. Thanks for your time, and thank you for watching at home, wherever your home may be. And see you next time.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good luck in your other talks, Eli and Randy.
Thank you.
Thanks.